Welcome to Midnight Stories. This is where you'll find scary horror tales to give you chills. Before watching, please hit the like button to support me. It helps me create more stories and share them with more people. Thanks so much for your support. Enjoy the show. Also, if you like my content, check out my second channel. The link is in the description or comments. Your support means everything to me. The moving truck's engine groaned as it climbed up the dusty dirt road, each turn of the wheel sending clouds of sand into the air. I sat behind the wheel, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. The dry, empty land stretched out endlessly in front of me, a sea of shrubs and sun-bleached rocks. Almost there, I muttered, though it didn't make me feel any better. Our new home appeared in the distance, a single-story ranch house, weathered and old, blending into the lifeless surroundings. The realtor had called it rustic charm. Now, seeing it up close, abandoned felt like a better word. As I pulled into the driveway, a heavy sense of unease washed over me. The house stood silent, its windows dark and unwelcoming. The nearest neighbor was miles away, hidden beyond rolling hills of sand and scattered cacti. I had never minded being isolated before, but something about this place felt wrong. I shook off the feeling, blaming it on nerves and exhaustion from the long drive. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and begin something new. I wasn't about to let unfounded fears ruin it before we'd even unpacked. Stepping out of the truck, the desert heat hit me like a wall. The air was thick and still, carrying the sharp smell of creosote and sun-baked earth. I walked to the back of the truck to start unloading when something caught my eye, a flicker of movement on the horizon. I turned and scanned the landscape, but saw nothing except shimmering heat waves rising from the ground. Still, the unsettling feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. My gaze drifted to a distant cluster of rocks. Their shadows seemed to stretch and shift in ways that didn't match the sun's position. "It is a mirage," I whispered, trying to convince myself, but the words felt empty even to me. With a deep breath, I threw myself into unloading, trying to ignore the tingling feeling at the back of my neck. The sun began to set, painting the sky with fiery oranges and purples. By the time I brought the last of our belongings inside, I was completely drained. I collapsed onto a makeshift bed of blankets in what would eventually become the living room. The house creaked and groaned around me, unfamiliar sounds in an unfamiliar place. As I drifted off to sleep, my last thought was a quiet hope that everything would feel better in the morning. I had no idea how wrong I would be. The next few days blurred together as I unpacked and tried to settle in. I pushed away the uneasy feeling that seemed to linger in the house, focusing instead on practical tasks, arranging furniture, organizing, and making the space livable. But as the initial busyness faded, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. At first, it was small things. Items would go missing, only to reappear in places I was sure I hadn't left them. I chalked it up to the chaos of moving or my own forgetfulness. But as it kept happening, the strange events started happening more often, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Then came the sounds. In the dead of night, when the desert was silent except for the occasional coyote's cry, I would hear the faint scratching like nails dragging across wood. The sound always came from just outside my bedroom window. Every time I mustered the courage to look, I saw nothing, just the empty yard bathed in pale moonlight. About a week after we moved in, I stepped outside one morning and froze. Strange tracks marked the dirt near the house. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen, neither fully animal nor human. The prints were long, distorted, and uneven, as if whatever made them walked on the edges of misshapen feet. I stared at the tracks, my mind racing to find a logical explanation, but deep down, I knew no local animal could have made them. My eyes followed the trail, which led directly to my bedroom window. The sand beneath it was disturbed, as though something had stood there for a long time, watching. A chill ran through me, freezing me in place. Then panic set in. I rushed back inside, heart pounding, and spent the rest of the day checking and rechecking every lock on every door and window. That night, as I lay in bed trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation for everything, I heard it again. The scratching, it was louder this time, more urgent, and beneath it came a low, guttural sound, something unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And I wanted to scream, to run, to call for help, but fear gripped me like a vice. I was frozen, unable to move as the sounds continued just outside, separated from me by nothing but a thin pane of glass. When the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the noises finally stopped. I lay trembling until the sun was fully up. Only then did I dare to look outside. What I saw made my stomach drop. Deep gouges marred the wooden frame of my window, fresh and unmistakable. Whatever I'd heard wasn't just in my imagination, it had been real. Something had been there clawing at the window, trying to get in. And somehow I knew with chilling certainty it would be back. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. The incidents became more frequent, impossible to dismiss. The scratching at my window became a nightly torment, sometimes joined by heavy breathing or low, animalistic growls. Desperate for relief, I started sleeping in the living room, as far away from the windows as possible. But it didn't matter. The sound, other strange things started happening too. Small items began disappearing from the yard, gardening tools, a wind chime, even a small decorative statue. At first, I tried to convince myself it was kids playing pranks, but we were far too isolated for that to make sense. Then I found one of the missing items. The wind chime, mangled and twisted beyond recognition, was half buried in the sand at the edge of our property. The sight of it made my stomach churn. This wasn't the work of animals, nor was it a harmless prank. Whatever was doing this was intelligent, and it seemed to be sending me a message. One afternoon, as I was hanging laundry on the clothesline in the backyard, that now familiar sensation of being washed returned. My skin prickled and I froze, slowly turning to scan the horizon. That's when I saw it, a figure. It stood motionless in the distance, just at the edge of my property. It was tall, thin, and distorted, like its body didn't quite belong. The heat waves rising from the desert blurred its outline, making it hard to focus on any details. My heart raced as I stood there, gripping a damp sheet in my hands. I wanted to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down I knew better. It was watching me. The figure stood perfectly still among a cluster of cacti about 100 yards away. It was tall, far taller than any person I'd ever seen, and its proportions were all wrong. Its arms were too long, dangling almost to its knees, and its legs bent at unnatural angles. I blinked, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me, but when I looked again, it was still there. Frozen in terror, I watched as it moved. It took a single fluid step forward. The motion was eerily smooth, almost graceful, but it was utterly inhuman. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a trick of the light or my imagination. I ran.